So my name is Barbara Petitti. I'm a Global Ethics and Compliance Officer for Alstom Transportation. We are a global rail provider in providing both systems and infrastructure for railway solutions.
Are you a French-based company?
We are.
So, no, say that because I don't. Did you say that?
Oh, certainly. It's a French organization.
And how long have you been with them?
I've been with Alstom since 2012, so it's going on 8 years.
And with whom were you before?
Prior to Alstom, I was with General Dynamics.
For how long?
I was at General Dynamics for 15 years.
And in the ethics compliance?
Correct. I had a variety of roles in my previous organization that morphed into a more pure ethics and compliance role. Starting out, when I got into this field, I had been in a traditional practice of law, and I left that intentionally because I wanted to do more proactive problem solving in my career. Came into a corporate setting, initially in an HR, human resources function. And over time, that morphed, and it morphed into something where gradually I started taking on compliance projects, so to speak, and the role eventually became one more of pure compliance. And it was, I guess, lucky for me, being a decent problem solver, that the problems kept coming my way. I came into ethics and compliance largely by accident. I had a boss who was the ethics officer in the organization I was working for. It was a small subsidiary of General Dynamics. And he got promoted, and he came to me one day and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "How would you like to be the ethics officer?" And, of course, I was young and hoping to expand my career and grow, and I said I'd love to do that, not knowing really anything about what that meant or what the role really entailed. I said yes, and then began my journey of learning what it meant to be an ethics professional.
And how would you describe what it means to be an ethics professional?
Being an ethics professional means, I think, different things for different organizations. Working in the defense industry at the time, it meant helping the organization have a program or a system for making good business decisions and doing business with integrity. Now, for some organizations that aren't as regulated as a defense company, it means different things. It means figuring out their own values and how they want to do business. Essentially, being an ethics professional means doing business honestly and fairly, and also in compliance with different external rules and regulations. But it can mean different things for different organizations.
Talk to us about your personal professional changes, how your career has changed over the years, and how you view that.
Okay. So being trained as an attorney, when I started my career in a more traditional law firm setting, I found it challenging to always be on the defensive, always reacting. And there were lots of problems that would come my way in that setting that I used to think, if only I was involved earlier, if only I could have been involved in a way where maybe I could have prevented this issue from happening. And I saw, because I was doing some employment law at the time, I saw organizations that made a lot of mistakes. And I used to think in the back of my head, if only they had someone who could say, maybe if you had handled this way, there wouldn't be someone sitting in front of a lawyer right now. And so when I left the practice of law and came into the corporate setting, my first role was with a subsidiary of General Dynamics called Bath Iron Works. And I started there in human resources doing affirmative action and employee relations. And a lot of it really was trying to have a proactive approach to make employees feel heard. And eventually that morphed into something bigger. And I took on a more traditional role as an ethics professional. But I knew right away that this was the right place for me, because being an ethics professional, being in compliance, means that you're proactively trying to prevent things from happening. You're looking at the processes and the systems in an organization and saying, how can we do this better? What can we do that would prevent this from happening again?
So, but do you still see yourself as an attorney, as an HR person, something new?
I don't see myself as an attorney for my organization. I'm grateful that my background in training helps me solve problems and think about things in an analytical way. Now I really do see myself as a problem solver for my organization.
And how have you gotten known inside of your organizations as the go-to problem solver?
One person at a time. It really starts from the ground up, building relationships, performing in a way that people learn they can trust you and that there's someone you can come to that will provide them with practical guidance, but also someone that is trustworthy and responsive. And it really is one employee at a time that your reputation develops.
Do you have any examples of how you think, at all the places that you've worked, that bring to life this idea of solve a problem one person at a time? How many stories?
I have so many stories, and I know from working in the shipbuilding industry, I used to have lots of employees come to me who felt scared to speak up. And it would take many conversations with them one-on-one, where eventually they would open up a little more, until we would get to the heart of the issue. And they would come to a place of trust where they would say, I know this is someone who will really take this issue seriously and do all that they can to fix it and make things better. But it was not always that way. I mean, early on, it was hard to get employees to really talk openly and trust that they were dealing with someone who was going to help them and not hurt them in the workplace.
Have you ever had encounters that made your work easier or harder to do because you're not a traditional tradesperson? You're an attorney, you're female. And you don't present as someone with a strong technical background. How did you have any doors open or doors shut because of that?
So I've had some experiences along the way that have really helped me in my role. One experience I remember goes back to maybe the year 2000 or 2001. The shipyard that I was working at, Bath Iron Works, was operating 3 different shifts of employees. And I used to stay over so that I had some overlap with second shift. And there was a superintendent who was responsible for that shift. And he used to come to me when he arrived at work, which was usually at 5 or 5:30, and we would talk about the issues that were going on, the employee issues, the problems. He would give me a debrief of things that he thought were risks and things that were happening. And I would talk to him about issues that I was concerned about. And we had developed a nice rapport. And one night he came to my office after what I had had was a particularly bad day. And he was talking to me about an issue, and it was about a female employee who seemed to be having some difficulties at home, and these issues were carrying over into the workplace and into her performance, and he was concerned about her. And he was talking to me about this issue, and I'd had such a hard day. It was one of those days where I had employees in my office pretty much back to back to back to back. No time for lunch, no time for bio breaks. And I remember feeling, okay, one more person needs me. And I just had this feeling of overwhelm. And I remember out of one corner of my eye, I was watching my emails. And out of another corner of my eye, I was thinking, I would kill for a cup of tea right now. And he was talking to me about this very serious issue. And we knew each other quite well. And he knew I was not listening to him. And he stopped me. And he sort of scolded me in a way that professionals who know each other and trust each other can do. And he said, I'm trying to talk to you about something important, and you're not listening, and I can tell. And he said, you're fairly new in your career, but I would recommend that when this happens to you, that you stop and you take a break, and you tell whoever's listening to you that now's not a good time. Let's set up some time when I can really pay attention and be present and listen to you. He said, because the people that come to you with their issues deserve and demand that kind of attention. So now I look back, that's 20 years ago. That message, that is one thing that I have carried with me on a daily basis, and I have not forgotten that. And that has served me well in all of the issues that face me. When people come to see me, whether it's management above me, whether it's employees, I have taken that, listen with intention, be present, give the person in front of you the trust and attention they deserve. And that stands out for me, that one incident.
Any other of those lessons that you can share? Think about the practice, the everyday practice of doing ethics and compliance. Mm-hmm. The dirty fingernail approach. Mm-hmm. Listening, being present, being accessible, taking time to get to know the people you're working with. Mm-hmm. Any other key lessons that you'd like to be certain that others think about?
So I had a mentor who helped shape some of the ways that I approach problem solving in the workplace. This was someone who, no matter what the issue he was dealing with, employees at the end of a meeting, whether even in the sense if he was disciplining or maybe even discharging someone, employees felt respected and heard by him, and they would leave a meeting and shake his hand. And I remember early on being in front of employees who didn't like the way I was handling something or didn't like the ultimate decision, and they would be very angry. And in return, I could feel myself being defensive or being protective in response. And what I learned over time was that people are not always going to like your answer, and they won't always like the response, but you can treat them in a way that they feel like the process was fair and they were handled in a way that makes them feel valued as an employee, even if they don't like the end response. And that's something that I still use all the time. I remember that. There are sometimes issues I don't want to communicate to employees because I know it won't be a popular response. But if I treat them a certain way, they'll be a little better with it. Still not liking the end result, but feeling like they were treated well.
Think of some of the other hard choices you've had to make. A colleague of ours used to call it throwing yourself in front of a train. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you able to or willing to share some of those stories when you felt like you had to put a lot on the line to do the right thing? And it can be at any of the places that you've been doing ethics and compliance. Mm-hmm. Any of those moments of the, oh my goodness.
There are so many. So I had an issue a few years ago when I first came to Alstom, where we had been engaging in some practices with some customers that were not the way that you should be doing business. And I had a group of longtime employees, all men, who did not want to listen to the guidance I was giving them, and had this, energy that was, you're sort of new here, and you're a woman. We've been at this company for a long time. We know what we're doing. We don't need your help. And as someone who, I tend to be very introverted, and in situations of conflict, I can retreat. And in this particular situation, I had to own my power, and I had to stand up, and I had to tell them, no, this is the way we're going to do things. And I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to help keep the company and you out of trouble. And so this is the way it's going to be. And that was probably back in, I'm going to say 2013, maybe 2014, when the organization was going through quite a bit of problem solving and a lot of turmoil. That was probably the first in a long road of issues like that, where I had to dig deep and really take a leadership position, take a stance in something, even though it was very challenging.
Have you had situations where you've had to disagree with a senior executive, someone to whom you report or your bosses report to, delivering similarly tough messages?
I've had many experiences when I didn't necessarily agree with my management or management in other parts of the organization. And the most important lesson I've learned is to remain calm and share my input on why I disagreed and explain that a lot of the information that I learned over time that led me to a place of why I disagree, and calmly sharing that and basically saying, this is my professional guidance. The company may decide to go in another direction. This is what I recommend and why. And very calmly share that after years of experience in this field, this isn't just my opinion. This is also an educated, informed position based on years of dealing with these kinds of challenges.
And how have you been received when you take that calm, measured approach to a problem?
I feel I've finally reached a place in my career where I am taken very seriously. And it hit me several months ago when I was sharing guidance with my boss on something, and I expected a big fight. And I was sort of geared up and ready to have this big fight. And instead, I was given a very calm response of, okay, we'll do it that way. And it was, oh, okay. I guess I've hit this place where now I'm respected and maybe have a little more power than I realize.
I'm thinking about the time you had at Bath Iron Works. There is in the literature, of course, this apocryphal story, or maybe it's true, of the sneak a peek on a Pentagon or Department of Navy contract of some kind. I don't know if you were there at Bath at the time, but do you know the story? Can you talk about maybe its impact? Tell the story of the sneak a peek. Mm-hmm. But then what happened inside the organization after that?
When I was at Bath Iron Works, the shipyard had a scandal years before I arrived there, where someone had come into possession of some Navy documents that we should not have had. And they took a look at the documents, and it resulted in a big investigation and ultimately caused the organization to change some things and do some things differently. It was a well-known issue. It scared a lot of people. A lot of employees became much more vigilant about the way they handled sensitive or confidential documents in the workplace. And it was a real leg up for the ethics and compliance program there that all of a sudden now had what I'll call a shot in the arm and leverage to implement some different controls in the organization and new communication and new training. And it was an opportunity to really give their program a boost, even though it was a difficult time and people talked about it as if, oh, we don't want to go back there again. But it was an opportunity for the organization to elevate their program and implement some global best practices around ethics and compliance.
Do you have a link to any information? Was anything published or papers done on that?
Oh, well, there's lots of stuff, but it's been so long.
If you can, if you think about it and just say, oh, take a look here and there. This is pre-internet. This is 1989, 88.
Yeah.
It's pre-DII, or maybe
it's probably right around DII.
Middle of the 1980s.
I mean, it would probably be better to talk about like the blue ribbon panel, or the more well-known. I mean, I could make a reference to that as a bigger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Why don't you want to talk about the blue ribbon panel and how some of those, what caused that? I think that's a procurement scandal in the defense industry. Mm-hmm. And from your perspective, what happened in Sweet after that? Mm-hmm. What momentum does it start?
Okay. So I was fortunate when I started my career at Bath Iron Works in the late 90s. It was on the heels of a number of different defense industry mishaps, shall we say. And there was one large one that was a procurement scandal that I think many folks considered to cause the birth of the modern ethics programs in the defense industry. And being in ethics and compliance at that time was really very fortunate because there was such a wave of change happening all at once. And one of the first things was having the establishment of professional organizations. And the Ethics Officers Association, the EOA, was an organization that I became active in at that time. And it was really the first organization that was like a trade organization for ethics officers that allowed a source of information and guidance and rapport for other professionals, and that started it. The Defense Industry Initiative was another organization that came into being in the mid to late 80s that provided a sense of structure for defense industry professionals to have information sources and resources for their programs and visibility into a practice that was really at that point not formalized for most organizations to deal with scandal and workplace issues.
So of these associations, networks, resource groups, very important at the early part of your career, what role do they play now that you really are very, very well seasoned, very highly experienced as a compliance and ethics professional? How about today?
When I first started my career, I was fortunate to have sources of mentoring and resources in the Ethics Officers Association, which later became the ECOA, and the ECI, the Fellows Program. And I was someone that needed to learn. And I had to rely on other more experienced and seasoned practitioners to help shape me and guide me. Now I'm in a position years later where I go to conferences and I speak and I share information. In my team at Alstom, I'm one of the senior people. And so I'm helping to mentor and shape some of our younger employees on the team, on the ethics and compliance team, smart, hardworking professionals who haven't had the benefit of a long time in the industry to know some of the issues that we've dealt with in the past and to see all the resources that are in place now because of some of the early pioneers in ethics and compliance.
You've talked about Alstom being a French organization, and as we know, you're based in the U.S., you're based in Virginia. Any challenges, any opportunities, any unexpected gifts that those relationships have given you, or that you've been able to take advantage of?
Say more. Like,
what's it like to be the practitioner here, but the corporate headquarters is elsewhere? Does it open a door? Does it close a door? Is it easier? Has it given you a challenge you never thought you'd be able to have or experience from just your career perspective?
So being an ethics and compliance professional based in the U.S. but working for a French company has, I think, pros and cons. A lot of the pros are that my organization relies on me to be a source of expertise in a geographical environment where ethics and compliance is a much newer profession. In Europe, globally, in other parts of the world, the U.S. is seen as the leader in setting the standard for how ethics and compliance programs should operate. And so that's been a real benefit to me because I've had an opportunity to share a lot of my knowledge and skills and experience. At the same time, I am an individual contributor and I don't have a team in the U.S., so I have to rely on my local network to be a source of professional rapport for me, and sometimes I need people that have either more experience than me or equal amounts of experience to run issues by, or just a sense of having a professional belonging. So there's pluses and minuses at this point.
Is there an ethics program in France? Headquarters?
So I report to the central team. I'm actually part of a team that's based in France.
So how big is the team?
The team is 14 people.
Do they also do all global, I assume?
Mm-hmm. So we have 7 people on the central team, and then we have 7 people that are based in the regions that are considered like a regional compliance officer. Mm-hmm. But I'm part of the central team.
And is that, what are the pluses and minuses of that?
Well, I travel to Paris a lot.
Yeah, well, that I would assume is a plus.
I have to think about that.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to be by yourself? That's what or maybe the network helps.
Part of being geographically dislocated from the rest of the team is a challenge. We rely on technology quite a bit. I don't have a local team. I don't have local professionals that I collaborate with. I don't have professionals that I go to lunch with. So it is a bit isolating. The flip side is that I have quite a bit of flexibility, and I get to determine how my days are structured. On the days when I have a lot of employee meetings or I'm interacting with a lot of people, days following that I may be doing some writing of reports or I may be reviewing things. So I'm very fortunate in that I get to determine my own priorities and how my time is spent.
So you talked a lot about where you began, where you are now. How do you see your career going? What might be next in your own personal future? Mm-hmm. And then I want you to think about what some of the questions we have yet to address that you might have a chance to look at.
Mm-hmm. My career progression has taken me on a path that I didn't expect or plan. I got into ethics and compliance mostly by accident, and I've stayed here largely because I've been okay with change. The last several years in particular, when I started at Alstom in 2012, we were in the middle of an enforcement action. As soon as that wrapped up, a big chunk of the company was sold to GE, and we were still finding our footing when we decided to merge with Siemens. That merger failed. It did not get regulatory approval. And so then again, we're sort of regrouping after that. And now just a few days ago, we found out that we're buying Bombardier. So for me personally, I've had to stay nimble and not get too invested in any one setup, knowing that it may change next week or next month or next year. So for me, my next steps are to remain open, knowing that what may come my way may not be what I expect, but it might take me down an interesting path. So I'm not really sure what the next steps are.
So think about some of the big questions or issues that you think those in the ethics and compliance world might be talking about the next 5 to 10 years. There's no perfect crystal ball. But what are some of these emerging queries, challenges, risks, topics?
Some of the future issues that concern me relate to data privacy and also technology. we're now in a world where things are changing so quickly. And as someone who is sort of approaching the end of my career or thinking ahead toward retirement, I make a very specific effort to stay on top of technology as much as possible. And that's going to become increasingly more important as technology changes and our workforce changes. And now most companies are dealing with global challenges around data privacy and around security and technology breaches. And we've got to be prepared to deal with those things. Most ethics and compliance professionals that I know are not tech experts, and that's something that makes people a little uneasy. So I think that's an area that we need to focus on. I also think we will be faced with some shortages in the ethics and compliance field as people exit for retirement and shifting their life, that we may have a shortage of experienced professionals in the field. And so we need to be thinking about, are we doing enough to train the next generation of ethics and compliance officers?
And how do you see, is one of the challenges of ethics officers to think about global warming or climate change, sorry, that's more politically correct, or does that come up much in your organization?
In my organization, things like corporate sustainability and corporate responsibility are handled by a separate department from ethics and compliance. Certainly we're connected, we're linked, in that we are looking at proactive ways to make sure that the company is committed to doing business ethically and making sure we're having a limited footprint environmentally. But I don't know that I see that firmly planted in the responsibility for ethics and compliance.
Any other emerging ethical big questions or big risks? We've talked about technology. We've talked about data privacy. We've talked about just the occupational challenge. Who's going to succeed in your generation? Any other emerging risks that may or may not be on the mandate of the ethics office, but that have ethical issues or ethical considerations that we need to be able to talk about?
One area that concerns me for ethics and compliance officers and for organizations revolves around wellness for ethics and compliance officers. And even though that's a more personal issue and maybe not necessarily an organizational one, it does impact organizations. I've seen ethics and compliance officers face a lot of turmoil in their organizations and long stretches where there are ongoing enforcement actions, ongoing investigations, where maybe executives are being prosecuted, where there's a tremendous amount of stress in the organization. And ethics and compliance officers have personal stress, a great deal of personal stress. And it doesn't seem to me that there is enough infrastructure to deal with that and to help ethics and compliance officers if they're struggling. There is a conflict in their role in terms of them being the individuals that others would come to who might be struggling. Who do they go to? Who will be their sources of support and strength in the event that there's a struggle for those professionals? I'm not sure if that answered you or not. Okay.
No.
Okay.
That hasn't come up before.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
Okay.
You led on employee rights. How do you see, sort of, particularly in the engineering sector, acceptance of working? I mean, you're going to have de-skilling and casualisation of labour as technology takes over certain job functions and roles. Is that being a rising issue?
Well, where employee rights are concerned, because I work for a European organization, the labor and works councils are very active, and I see that as something that will continue. I don't really think that will be a short-term problem.
Does that import back into your US operation at that level?
Not so much. The subsidiaries really handle those kinds of issues separately in terms of regional legal and other local types of legislation. They handle it separately.
So as we wind down, reflect a little bit about if you could identify one or two real career successes and any regrets. A missed opportunity, a call you wish you'd made differently. Balance them both out as you take a couple of moments to reflect.
Mm-hmm. I have the success. I am trying to think of a good. There's so many failures, but
start with the success.
Okay, I'll start with the success. So a couple of years ago, when my organization Alstom was transitioning, a determination was made to sell 2/3 of the organization to GE. And this was at a time when I was the North American compliance officer, and I loved my job. I was so engaged with it. I was doing investigations. I was doing communications and training. I was handling sales agents and due diligence, and I was really using all of my professional skills and just loved what I was doing. And all of a sudden, this big company came in and said, we're buying a big piece of you. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And myself, along with most of my colleagues, were quite nervous. It was quite stressful. And I worried every single day whether I would have a job or not. At the same time, you have to keep going. You have to focus on. It was a really busy time. And when the deal was, days before the deal became final, I was approached by the management of the resulting Alstom organization, and I was asked to stay. They told me that they valued my contribution, that I was someone who now would have the institutional knowledge and history, and they wanted to continue. They wanted a consistent ethics and compliance presence. And when I look back on that time, I doubted myself, and I was operating in a very scared, insecure place. Instead of trusting that all of my experience and all the hard work would pay off and that I would land and be okay. And I did land, and I was okay. If I could go back, I wish I could have told myself to not be so worried and so scared, and just trust that things will work out. I don't feel like I am. I feel like I'm mumbling.
Can you name check a few of the people who have had the greatest influence from inside and outside of this career on your career and the political things?
Oh my goodness. Carrie Penman, Keith Darcy, Joan Dubinsky. Oh gosh.
What were you getting from?
Knowledge, leadership, strength, maturity, inspiration. Pat Harned. Oh gosh. I know I had a bunch of names in my head in there.